The midnight screening. It started like any other Friday night. I had no plans, so when I saw a last-minute ad for a midnight movie at an old theater in town, I figured why not? The theater was one of those places that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The marquee was missing letters, and the neon sign flickered like it was barely holding on. Still, there was something about it that drew me in. Maybe curiosity, or just boredom. Inside, the place was nearly empty. Only a few people scattered throughout the seats. They sat oddly still, like they weren't even waiting for the movie to start. I chose a seat somewhere in the middle, close enough to the screen but far enough from everyone else. I settled in, popcorn in hand, and waited for the film. When the lights dimmed and the previews started, I noticed something strange. Instead of the usual trailers, there were images of people, almost like a home video montage. Families at parks, kids riding bikes, people in coffee shops. The footage seemed random, but there was something off about it. It felt too real, like I was watching someone's life. Then, the main feature began. The movie started out as a typical indie film, quiet, understated, with mundane scenes of someone's daily life. But as I watched, I started to get an unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. The person on the screen wasn't just a random character. It was me. I saw myself doing everyday things, walking to the store, grabbing coffee, talking with friends. The details were exact, things only I would know. I shifted in my seat, heart racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. How could this be possible? It was like someone had been filming me without my knowledge, capturing moments of my life that no one else could have known about. I looked around, hoping to see someone else reacting. But the other people in the theater remained motionless, like they were in a trance. No one else seemed disturbed, like they weren't seeing what I was seeing. I turned back to the screen, dread creeping over me. The scenes were no longer just my past. They were showing my future. I saw myself sitting exactly where I was now, in the very same theater, watching this cursed movie. The camera zoomed in on my face, the panic in my eyes evident. My heart pounded as I watched the events unfold on screen. The movie showed me standing up, trying to leave, but the doors wouldn't open. In the final scene, the camera panned back to my seat, but I was gone. Only an empty seat remained. As the movie faded to black, the lights in the theater flickered back on. I stood up, shaking, and looked around, but the theater was empty. The handful of people who had been there earlier were gone. I rushed to the exit, but just like in the movie, the doors were locked. I pounded on them, desperate to get out, but it was no use. I glanced back at the screen, half expecting something to change. That's when I noticed the neon sign outside the window, reflecting off the glass in the lobby. The flickering letters spelled out the same title as the movie I had just watched. And in the reflection, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My own face, staring back at me, just like in the final scene of the film. I was trapped, just like the others, stuck in the cycle of the midnight screening. I had become part of the show and no one would ever know I was missing. Now all I can do is wait, hoping that someone else will come to the midnight screening and take my place. But until then, I'll be here, watching the same cursed movie, night after night. The Vanishing Audience. I wasn't planning to go to the movies that night. It was one of those cold, rainy evenings perfect for staying in, but something pulled me toward the old theater downtown. I hadn't been there in years. The place had a reputation, rumors of odd happenings and stories of people disappearing, but I figured it was just urban legend. Still, when I saw that they were showing a classic horror movie marathon, I couldn't resist. Nostalgia got the best of me, and I bought a ticket. The theater was barely alive, its faded walls and dim lighting giving it a forgotten, eerie vibe. I walked in and noticed right away that there weren't many people there. maybe 10 or 12 at most, scattered throughout the rows. I chose a seat toward the back, hoping to stay unnoticed. As the lights dimmed and the movie started, I felt a chill in the air. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the old building. The first movie was slow, atmospheric, one of those vintage films that built tension with long silences and shadowy figures lurking in the background. I found myself getting lost in the story, the grainy film flickering across the screen, but something kept nagging at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. During the movie's quietest moment, I glanced around. The guy sitting a few rows in front of me was gone. At first, I thought he'd just slipped out for a snack or to use the restroom, but as the movie went on, I noticed more and more empty seats. I could have sworn there had been at least a dozen people when I walked in, but now there were only a handful. I scanned the theater, trying to see if anyone had moved or left, but the lobby doors were still closed. No one had come in or out. The sense of unease grew, but I tried to push it aside. Maybe I'd just been too focused on the movie to notice people leaving, but by the time the second film started, it became impossible to ignore. There were now only 3 of us left. The couple sitting near the middle aisle, who had been whispering to each other earlier, was suddenly gone. Their seats were completely empty, as if they had vanished without a sound. I leaned forward, gripping the armrest. My pulse quickened. This wasn't normal. My eyes darted to the screen, but the movie continued without interruption, casting its ghostly light on the now mostly deserted theater. I stood up, glancing toward the door, thinking I should leave. But something kept me frozen in place. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe something deeper, more sinister. Then, one of the last 2 remaining audience members, a woman sitting in the front row, disappeared right before my eyes. I blinked, unsure if I had actually seen it happen. One moment she was there, her head slightly tilted as she watched the screen, and the next, she was gone, like a shadow dissolving into the darkness. Now, it was just me and one other person, a man sitting 2 rows ahead. I watched him carefully, waiting for something to happen. The minutes dragged on, the movie playing as if nothing was wrong, but the growing dread in my chest told me otherwise. Finally, just like the others, he vanished. 1 second he was there, and the next, the seat was empty. I was alone. Completely alone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the projector. The screen flickered, casting eerie shadows across the theater. I stood up, heart racing, and made my way toward the exit. My footsteps echoed in the empty space, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. When I reached the doors, they wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, but it was like they had been locked from the outside. Panic set in. I pounded on the doors, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me, but there was no response. The only sound was the persistent flicker of the movie still playing behind me. Desperate, I turned back toward the theater. The seats were empty, but I could feel eyes on me, a presence watching from the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The light from the screen seemed to dim, growing darker and darker, until the entire room was plunged into a suffocating blackness. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak. One of the seats behind me shifted, as if someone or something had just sat down. I didn't dare turn around. My breath caught in my throat as I stood frozen in place, the weight of whatever was now in the theater with me pressing down. I felt it before I saw it, the cold, creeping sensation of being watched. Slowly, ever so slowly, I turned toward the seats, heart hammering in my chest. The theater was empty, but the feeling of someone, or something, lurking just beyond the shadows never left me. The movie screen flickered once more, casting one final image before going dark. A single seat, empty, waiting for the next victim. The endless loop. It started off like any other night. I had some free time, so I decided to catch a late-night screening at the old theater downtown. I liked the place because it still played those old classic horror movies that gave me a nostalgic thrill. When I arrived, the theater was mostly empty, save for a few people scattered throughout the seats. The dim lighting and the faint scent of popcorn gave the place an eerie, old-world charm. The movie began, an old black-and-white horror film I'd seen before. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just a strange sense of déjà vu. The flicker of the film, the creak of the seats, even the quiet conversations of the other audience members all seemed a little too familiar. But I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the atmosphere playing tricks on me. As the movie played, the picture on the screen flickered. The film skipped for a second, then resumed. Only now, something was different. Subtle at first, the dialogue was slightly off, like the characters were saying lines they hadn't before. A scene played out that I didn't remember, even though I knew this movie inside and out. It was unsettling, but I figured it was some rare alternate cut or a technical issue. Then, the movie ended. The lights didn't come up. Instead, the screen flickered again, and the movie started over from the beginning. The exact same film. Only this time, the theater was darker, the atmosphere heavier, and the temperature felt colder. I looked around, but none of the other audience members seemed bothered. They just stared blankly at the screen as if nothing was wrong. The second time around, the changes were more pronounced. Characters' faces in the movie seemed distorted, as if they were melting or their features were twisted. One of them even looked straight at the camera. No, at me. For a brief second, I could swear they locked eyes with me from inside the screen. A chill ran down my spine, and my hands started to tremble. When the movie ended again, I waited for the lights to come back on. But instead, the film started a third time. This wasn't right. It was like the theater itself was stuck in a loop, endlessly replaying the same movie. I stood up to leave, but when I turned around, the exit doors were gone. I wasn't imagining it. Where there had been doors just an hour ago, there was now only a blank wall. The panic began to rise in my chest. I wasn't the only one feeling it either. The other audience members started to fidget in their seats, their expressions shifting from calm to confusion, then fear. I could hear murmurs, people whispering, asking what was going on. But no one moved. It was as if they were glued to their seats, just like me. The fourth time the movie started, everything was wrong. The characters were no longer just actors on a screen. They were moving in slow, jerky motions, their eyes hollow, and their mouths opening and closing as if they were trying to scream. The scenes were no longer following any logical order, jumping from one grotesque image to another, bodies twisted into impossible shapes, faces contorted in agony. And every so often I would catch a glimpse of something I couldn't explain. Flashes of the audience, including me, in the movie itself. I was on the screen. We all were. That's when I realized what was happening. We were part of the movie now. Each loop, the movie wasn't just changing, it was absorbing us. One by one, the people around me were disappearing from the theater and reappearing on the screen, trapped in this endless, nightmarish loop. Their faces twisted in horror as they screamed, trying to break free. But the film kept going and there was no stopping it. I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I was stuck, forced to watch as the nightmare unfolded again and again, each time more disturbing, more twisted than the last. The walls of the theater seemed to close in, the air thickening, the screen growing brighter and brighter until it felt like it would swallow me whole. And then, with a flicker, I saw myself up there, my face pale, my eyes wide with terror as I watched from inside the screen. It was me, trapped in the movie, a prisoner of this endless loop. I screamed, but no sound came out. The people in the audience were gone. There was no one left but me. The film started over once again. I knew there would be no escape. The theater had trapped me, just like it had trapped everyone before me. I was part of the movie now, stuck in this nightmare, watching myself from the outside, knowing that I would never leave. The movie would play on forever, and I was its newest star.